It is now time for a motion to adjourn with MP Chris Famous and Dwayne Robinson, JP.
And welcome to Motion to Adjourn. Unfortunately, my co-host is not able to join us today, but we do have a very special guest, Mr. Khalid Wasi, who is well known for his articles and op-eds that he writes in the Royal Gazette. But I'm hoping that he can share a bit more about himself for the folks who may not know him. Mr. Wasi, are you with us?
Yes, sir, Dwayne. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining us. And, you know, I just would like for you to kind of kick it off by, telling the listening audience a few things about you that they might not know.
Well, first of all, thank you. It was Christopher that invited me. So I want to first of all thank you guys for inviting me to the show Motion to Adjourn. And I can understand your question, given that I think you're probably around 29 or 30. So you may not know me. In fact, this is the first time I've ever spoke to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and many people today perhaps do know me from the op-eds and articles that I've written. But I would say, back 20, 30 years ago, I probably would have been more known because of my industry. I was a prominent construction worker. In fact, back in 1991, 92, 93, I was probably the largest black construction company in Bermuda. At that time, I also had 4 laundromats, which were popular. And even then, I was very involved socially, politically, and as an activist. In fact, talking about writing, I had to think again as to when was the first time I known myself to write. And I recalled back, I was about 15 or 16 years old, which happened to be about 57 years ago, in the AME Church, writing an article that was posted in church. And the Socratic Society thought enough of the article to have it archived in the Socratic Society. I don't know where the Socratic Society is today. Most of the members, like one just passed, and that was Myrtle Edness, I call her Aunt Myrtle. But many of the individuals who were a part of the Socratic Society, most of them, they were all mostly ladies, females. Many of them are of that generation and are gone. Yeah, but I've been more or less very active since my early days, right? And I was in a church, and at one stage, my ambition, really, truthfully speaking, was to be a minister, an AME minister. And I think at the age of 16, I can recall preaching a sermon down at, I think it's her chapel down there near Shelley Bay, and Bishop Bright announcing after that, he stood up in the church and said, any young man that wants to be a minister, I'm standing here now to say that they have a full scholarship. So I was offered a full scholarship at that stage, and perhaps being a bit too good to be true, I just didn't take it. And I didn't take it up, and my life turned a different course. And it was an interesting time because back then, 1968, 1969, 70, that was the beginning of what we call the Black Power era, right? Prior to that, most of us called ourselves either colored or Negroes. And but that was an era that it was called the Black Power era. And so around that time, it stirred something in my own being of questions. I was always, let's say, philosophical. But I had deep questions about, well, why is it? Why is it that we as a people, as black people, everywhere in the world, not just in Bermuda, we're subjugated? Now, I would say this, in my childhood, I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood, and many of some of my best friends were white and were Portuguese. So I didn't feel, the kind of racial intimidation or segregation right in that sort of in my immediate environment. Albeit having recall when I was younger, I remember walking to Elbow Beach and I seen the shiny brass handles, and I wanted to go to the door, and my mother snatched me with a panic, because at that time black people couldn't go into the front doors, right? But anyway, other than that, my social life was mixed, and aside from the young kids that used to come down from the base down to St. George's there, they were from the south, and when they would come up to Southampton to visit the NOB is the naval-based personnel. Most of them who up in the neighborhoods lived amongst the black communities, and they were socialized. But the ones down at the Kingley Field, they were in a closed environment, and their segregation or their racism or whatever, it was maintained. So when they would visit their friends in the country, and they see a person like me, they would be saying nigger, 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 right? So, aside from that, I didn't experience any real overt racism, but it was questionable to me. Why is it that everywhere we are subjugated? And then here we are, and we're in a church, and I'm looking around, and everything in the church, the pictures of Jesus, the pictures of the angels, the pictures of all, everything was white, and I couldn't rationalize it. And I was avid, as far as I was concerned, Christian in the sense of wanting people to believe in God and be virtuous and all that. But I couldn't reconcile these two items. And so particularly now you got Rep Brown saying, Rep Brown and them, Baron Baby Baron and Joe Brown's the singer, I'm black and I'm proud, and you go into church and you're singing, "What can make wash me white as snow?" So the two issues just did not gel. Now, in intervening in that, I went off to University of New York, and I have then Professor Briggs, who's a math teacher, much into metaphysics and all that, and so I got very involved in metaphysics. And then we have Farrakhan and these type of messages, and all these things coincide. And I listened to the message of the black Muslims, what was called then the black Muslims, through Elijah Muhammad, and in Bermuda. And I recall standing up because of the message that was preached was, you can accomplish what you will, respect yourselves, build yourself a nation. Don't condemn the enemy. Don't fight the enemy. Build your own life. Build your own nation. Go into business. Protect your women. Right? And I recall standing up one day and when the minister asked, "Do you believe in this message?" And I didn't put my hand up at all. I didn't philosophically believe in it. But then when he said, "Or do you think that this is good for black people?" I put my hand up. And then he said, "Would you make a stand on behalf?" And then I stood up and I became a member of the Nation of Islam. But I had always this curiosity inside me in terms of what the ideological aspects of life were about. So a lot of my movement then started in that organization. A lot of my personal development, because I was then young, 19, 20 years old, I was young. And the Nation of Islam basically was kind of anti-political. It did not get involved in politics of any type, really. It was more into social and economic development. And I became an entrepreneur at the age of 19 and 20 years old. I built the first house that I built on my own at the age of 23. Right? I was that's over on South Shore. You go up from Southern Princess on the left-hand side. That house would sell today, if it was to sell, for about $3 or $4 million. That was the first home I built on my own. But before that, I was on my own anyway. So 1975, after the Nation of Islam had changed or transformed, I was up front as far as ideological transformation. But from a political perspective, I then moved straight out into the world and I became a member of the Progressive Labour Party instantly. And right within maybe 6 months or 7 months, I think it was Chesley Trott from up in Southampton, basically resigned as he stepped down as the chairman, and became the chairman of the Southampton branch, right? But aside from that, I was also very close friends with Arnold Francis and Russell Dismont and but pardon me, I'm in a 1 second. Yeah, I was friends with Russell Dismont, Arnold Francis. All these guys were in the first bunch of political leaders in progressive in the first 1963 bunch. They were there, but these were guys who were expunged. They were kicked out of the party. Right? So I was friends with them, notwithstanding. So a lot of the history of the party, I knew about it, and because I got it directly from them, not indirectly. It was no hearsay. The front and center on the issue of what the Progressive Labour Party was about, or trying to be about, what happened in 1963, 1964, 1965. I was directly communicated about that. Right now, having said that, it will be interesting, and you'll find me writing a lot about that particular period, because you see, if anyone goes to the record, you will find that in 1963, that's when the Labour Party was formed and started, and its first leaders were established then. The very first leader, Arnold Francis, basically declared himself as the provisional leader. Why provisional leader? Because in his mind, the first objective of the Labour Party was to fill the branches with people. As you know, at that time, people were not allowed to vote. Right? There was the property vote and all of that type of stuff. So the issue of bringing people on board, the adult suffrage and the universal adult suffrage, and getting it, the idea was to give participation to everybody. So the objective, the first initiative, was to fill the branches, and in their mind, until they filled the branches and all the branches were populated, they could only consider themselves provisional leaders. So if you look at the record, and if you see the title of the leader in the beginning of the party, you would probably see, or you at least should see, the term provisional leader. Now, mind you, in the party, in the parliament, he had to be the leader of the party, so there was no ambivalence about that. But as far as the party is concerned, he was provisional leader. Now, that particular leader, in describing politics to me early, his idea, and this is how he expressed it to me, was that as far as the politics of the country or anywhere, every individual has to be equidistant from the flag, or equidistant from the sovereign of whatever it is. The individual has to be equidistant. In order for them to be equal to themselves, right, amongst themselves, they had to all be equidistant to the leadership, sovereignty, flag, whatever you call it, you put in place. 1964, there's an argument that takes place in the CCC, Central Committee. And the argument is between Mr. Mosellen and Mr. Arnold Francis, which was a consistent argument going on inside there. And the argument was really over trying to structure the party and getting all this type of stuff done. But there were issues that were going on the docks, in different places. And there was impatience on the part of people like Mose. But more so, there's another item that attaches to that. The United Bermuda Party started after the PLP started. If you look at its membership, all 30 of the, I think it was 24, sorry, 30. Yeah, 30. All 30 of the remaining members of the House, which was about 3 blacks and 27 whites, became what we call the United Unity Party. They couldn't get themselves past where they were. They couldn't attract any new talent into the, any black talent. They could not. But they had a scheme. And their scheme and aim was at Donald Francis. Their scheme and aim was at the middle class, merchant class blacks that were part of that party at that time. Because there was no other party representing the blacks except that particular party. So this argument that happened in 1964, in August of 1964, and if you'll find the foundation of the UBP was August 1964, same time, same period, and the argument takes place in the Central Committee, same place, same time, was being actually orchestrated. Unfortunately for me, because I've been friends also and good friends with people like Kid Aswad and so on, they talked about how they used to have Lewis Allen in their office, into Jack Tucker's office and his office, and how they used to, steam him up, and get him steamed up. And their target was Arnold. So he went into the party believing that he had goods, on Arnold. And they helped create the split. In 1965, early 1965, the House of Assembly gets a letter from the Central Committee and says these individuals, named Arnold Francis, Russell Bismarck, Cecil Clark, Walter Robinson, and Dorothy Thompson, no longer represent the Progressive Labour Party. The only one left is Mrs. Dame Lewis Brown. Right? They kicked them out. That same year, April, you're going to find the UBP populating its party with people like Stanley Letterby, Gloria McPhee. It happens. They begin to populate the party with the individuals that the PLP booted out, basically. So I know because I've talked to Gloria McPhee. I talked to these individuals who otherwise would have been PLP. Quentin Edmonds, who otherwise would have been PLP. All these individuals would have been PLP. And they had no sanctuary. And the reason why I had no sanctuary is because there was an element within the Progressive Labour Party. And that element was a socialist element. And let me explain it. And we don't need to apologize for that. Nor they need to apologize for that. Because everywhere, if you went to Africa, if you went to the Caribbean, the example for what transpired in Russia, where the peasant groups overtook they call it the Bolshevik Revolution or the Menshevik Revolution, where they overtook it. That became kind of an example, a standard, and the subjugated countries like Africa and so on. When it came down to trying to liberate the people, the example they drew was that. But the agenda, in order to achieve it, was the socialist agenda. You had to organize the labor, organize the peasant, so as they can take over and throw out the oligarchs and the capitalists, as it was called, in order to take over and create a social state towards a communist utopia. That was the idea. So you developed it was a strategy that came out of Russia, rolled on to Africa, rolled to the Caribbean. So you would have found people like Michael Manley and all that. When they argued to take over the country and whatever, and they argued on the basis of destroying capitalist economy and creating a new socialist economy based on a new economic model, global economic model, right? And it was an agenda. And so this agenda, you couldn't compromise that agenda.
Mr.
Because
Wasi?
you had to achieve it.
Sorry, we have to take a break. But
okay, sure.
We're taking our first break. We'll be right back with you to finish that thought, okay?
Yeah, sure.
And we're back to Motion to Adjourn. Mr. Wasi, please continue your thought.
Yes. So it was an agenda, right? So most people I can tell you, whether it was Stokely Carmichael, you can name them. All the black activists of the day were all mostly socialists. There's no embarrassment about that, but that's the action that they took. And as a result, it was popular. It was cliche. Back in the day, you consider yourself a leftist. You were a movement maker or aligned with trying to make progress. You consider yourself a leftist, and that's the way it was. But the aspect of what that meant to the party was that this element rooted out what we had as a merchant class, right? It wanted to produce this agenda. So in order to have that agenda, you can't have, liberal thought. It's not such thing as this. So you have to construct a party along the lines of an agenda, right? So hence you have, because you're not trying to create a brotherhood of men, you're creating a camaraderie. So no accident that you have the term comrades, being spread around, because comrades are an entirely different idea than the brotherhood of man, where all people are equal and liberal and equal rights and blah blah blah, and we're trying to develop a democracy. It's an entirely different concept. So that concept and agenda basically took precedent and pushed out, and as a result of that, the merchant class or the middle class in Bermuda basically got blown away, and the Labour Party was part and parcel of that. If you go back in our history, now let's get down to another point, which is coefficient to this. When it comes down to the issue of human liberty, emancipation, and freedom, right? Let's consider that all men are equal and are born free, and we have slavery. And we have other sort of subjugations based on political and class and ism and all these things. When you deal with the issue of bringing about egalitarianism or freedom or democracy or whatever that type of thing, we have to look at the status of where people are at the time that you think about you had those thoughts. And if you go to Bermuda back in 1960, and I know this is clear in my mind, most of us in our black community, if we went in our own neighborhood, we found our grocery store. If I wanted to buy lumber, I went to L.L. Mead in Butterfield. We had Rayner's Garage. There wasn't any element or economic activity in our community that we were not participating in and actually even thriving in. We were not equal in the sense of having full economic equality. But amongst ourselves, we were self-determining. That's the way we were. So now, if you were to say, in the 1960s, that's where you were, if you want to try to make a people free and emancipate or give them more liberty, you have to ask the question, well, what do they need? Now, if you went to around the Caribbean or around the world, and even up in North America or Canada, you would find a difference, a disparity of what those needs were. I mean, for example, here in Nova Scotia, 16 years ago, they were celebrating up in North Preston. They were celebrating having the first fire chief or first fire person that was like a fireman, as it were. And but Bermuda had premiers and this and but in Nova Scotia, the idea of what that community needed is far different from what Bermuda needed. And what Bermuda needed in 1960 was far different from what Jamaica needed. And what Jamaica needed was different from... So the point was, at the stage of 1960, Bermuda didn't need socialism, communism, or any particular ideology of that sort. The population needed a vote, and the businesses needed banks that were friendly, and they needed these type of opportunities to expand, but that didn't happen. What happened instead, we ended up with a party which developed a socialist agenda, wanted to nationalize telco, had an agenda like that. It attacked its very own people. It became unpopular. to be a businessman, to be it was called capitalist. The reason why I left the party in 1977 I left the party, was because as a chairman I was constantly being called by one of my, well, particularly some unfortunate ladies now deceased, but I was constantly called capitalist simply because all the ideas that I presented had an economic focus to them. For example, when the 1977 riots took place for Buck Morris and Larry Kaplan, I assumed at that stage that our people were economically frustrated and didn't have a positive angle, a positive axiom, or positive. So they took positive means for being able to address the frustration. So they took it out by rioting and this and whatever because they had nothing positive to build on. So I brought together a committee, and we asked ourselves questions. And I kind of knew the answer in advance, but I wanted a committee to do this. What if we were to have a renaissance, an economic renaissance? Where would that best be held? Would it be held in North Hamilton, or would it be held in Dockyard? The Dockyard has the facility of Marina at Port. It was old buildings. There was tumbleweeds. There was nothing going on over there at the time. So it had that possibility. So we assumed Dockyard would be the best place to have that kind of renaissance. So I worked on having that development. I came to Dame Lewis. I said, listen, we have an idea. What we need to do is we need to take control of Dockyard and develop it as a new city, right, a new township. But the emphasis there is for us to become part and parcel of the economy, and the way in is to have a foothold in Dockyard, a strong foothold in Dockyard. Her answer was, "But you got to get the government." I said, "Well, hold on there. We don't need the government, right? We need the government support and endorsement, but we don't need the government." I tell you, boys, you got to get the government first, because they earn it. They're not going. I said, "Well, hold on, Dan. Listen, Q and Dan, there, you Lewis, Q Lewis." I said, hold on. You have the ability, and the BIU has demonstrated it. You shut the country down for 15-cent raise, for 30-cent raise. Shut the entire country down for 30-cent raise. You mean you tell me you can't muscle the kind of political clout to cause our people to have their hands in the economy, right? I tell you, boys, you got to get the government first. So I don't curse much, but I swore at her. Dale Butler was present, right? And I walked out the door, and I walked straight up to Church Street, and walked into David Gibbons' office, who was there on top of the post office. I gave the same idea to David Gibbons. He said, "Do you think black people want this?" I said, "No, they don't want it. They need it, right?" How come some of my folks in my party now? I said, I can't speak for them, sir, but this is what our people need. And I was with Mr. Wayne Brown at the time, who is now the Permanent Secretary for I think business for the government in their financial ministry, and he could tell you, Mr. Gibbons offered us shares in the bank. And I said, no, this is what we want. We want our hands into the economy, right? And Dockyard will be. So what he done, he said, I'm going to introduce you to Stanley Reddery and Arnold Francis. He didn't realize that Stanley Reddery was my first cousin. And Arnold Francis, I already knew. So he introduced me to the two. They then got this group from England called the Petersburg, which became known as the Petersburg Group. They endorsed the idea of developing Dockyard as a township, and Burrs Island as a residential community, and open space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They told the minister in my president, Presidents Brown and myself, that there's no way they can come to Bermuda, this is the Petersburg Group, and give Bermuda an idea in 2 weeks that's going to outweigh the idea these guys have got. So they drew a blueprint of that. So David Gibbons and I, through David Gibbons, he went to the Parliament and got $10 million money, $10 million seed capital to do this development. And he got the seed capital, but turmoil happened in Bermuda, and Next thing you know, Bermuda's going down the road to a strike, 1981, and when that strike happened, after that, Mr. David sits down, and Sir John Swan comes up, becomes the new premier. So what happens to the plan? What happens to the plan next is Sir John Swan, who is not his own man, right? Sir David Gibbons is his own man, so he could have endorsed it and piloted it through. Sir John was not his own man. So as a result of that, the captains of the industry, which is Tucker and all these other folks there, they took over the plan that I had created. And I could instantly went to them and said, look, wait a minute, when they took it over, they formed this thing called Redco. I went to them and said, listen, this is our plan. It had a social agenda attached to it. And then I was told, well, listen, but if you don't have the money, then we can't, but the fact of the matter is, we did raise the money. Goldman Sachs came along and 200, anyway, I'm going to cut that short. They wanted, we had the funds. So later on, as I saw our community disappear in the economically, by 1990, we had nothing. I mean, I used to say to myself, my God, can't we even hire a truck? Because I had a business, I had a construction business. And I can tell you that 1960, 1970, 1980, and so on, I can tell by the activity who's supplying me with what, who I have to go to for trucking. I can tell you what's going on. And I could see by 1990, I said, well, God Almighty, can't we even own a truck, right? Because our black business was going on so fast, right? So the point here is I was an advocate of economic development as a component, a coefficient in social development, and the Labour Party was against that. They were certainly against it. Because ideologically, and that's the reason why it happened that in 1984, 85, people like Austin Thomas got up and said, the direction of the party is going to change, and they got booted out. 5 or 6 of them, actually 9 of them got booted out, right? So, and we look at the pedigree of those individuals, all of them Americans, So I'm going to fast forward and say to you, I think it's brave of you guys to bring me on this show, simply because I don't get invited to speak. I do not. The last time I was invited to speak by anybody was 1997, and that was a young man, Mr. Swan, from the Brock Swan family. Merrill Brock's his mother. He's now deceased, unfortunately. A brilliant young man. He called me up and he said, listen, Khalid, I want you to come and speak to our forum. It's not a forum, our banquet. He called me like in October, November of 1997. He said, our university has a banquet every year, and I would like for you to come and share your social economic agenda at our forum. I want you to be this keynote speaker, right? So I said, okay, all right. So come January, I hadn't heard back from him. So I decided, well, let me give him a call, because I'd like to sort of square up in terms of, exactly what we want to have said, and so I called him, and he said, "Listen, Khalid, man, I'm sorry, man. I'm glad you called, because like I'm so embarrassed to call you back, because what happened is," he says, "when I mention your name to the committee, this is a university group, he said, your name hit the floor, it hit the wall, it hit the ceiling. He said, I almost had to crawl at the door." He said, but they changed the policy to say that none but alumni of this university can speak to that particular banquet. But it just so happens this is 1998 February, and the person who is the keynote speaker happens to be Dr. Hewitt Brown. So that kind of parlays the. The reason why I'm saying this is because somebody the other day, I was talking to someone yesterday, And they said, well, look, the government PLP right now, you don't seem to be a friend of the PLP. You're attacking them. I said, no, I'm not really attacking them. I'm a writer. And one of the rules in journalism is that, try to be accurate. You should be a mirror. A writer, a journalist is a mirror of what you see. Don't try to paint your own story. Give a reflection of what you see. In fact, even artists, like people are musicians, you should give a reflection of what you see. Intellectuals need to give a reflection of what they see. When you are a persons who are politicians are trying to protect their turf or their party, they tend to paint. They paint the picture of a party in rosy colors, and because when you write, you're right. When you write, you're really right. When you're wrong, you're still right. So they got to paint it that way. But if you're trying to be fair and just to society, you paint what you see. So when the David Burton first came in, I saw an opportunity for him to be great. I saw an opportunity for him to excel and go beyond what other leaders done. So I wrote that way until it changed. So people look at me and say, well, look, you're attacking. I'm not. I'm just painting what I see. Well, so what you're saying is that they're better as an opposition. I said, no. Joined the PLP because I was trying then to go for the district that I thrived in a way because I built up most of Middletown and I had laundromats there and so on. So I said, okay, let me go and run for that district. I know I have enough tenants to support me in terms of if it was just simply based on numbers. So what happens there? In that district, you have basically the PLP at that time had an active committee or membership branch group, which is about 30 people. Ashfield event routinely won with about 22 votes every time it went up. Right? So I went to the party and I said, well, I'm going to want to contest the seat. So I had to go to the 6-man panel. And the 6-man panel, obviously, just simply turned me down. I thought I answered all the questions right. There's only one question that was, I guess, a bit dubious, and that was a question of loyalty. And even in that question, I said, I am loyalty. If I'm fighting for a party or a certain group, that's the party I fight for. Right? If I'm in your corner, I'm in your corner. You don't have to look over your back. I'm there. Right? I said, if I do have a disagreement, I wouldn't take it to the other side. I would come to the party and say, this is where we disagree. And if we can't come to some resolution on that, and if there's an issue where I have to make a stand, then I would leave the party. I wouldn't sit there and create a ruckus with that. But anyway, I was turned down. I was turned down at the level, and who should come through is Ralph Commission. Now I like Ralph Commission. In fact, I helped Ralph Commission. He worked for me because he was in prison. And while he's in prison, I signed a release so that he could come out and work to get released from prison. And I signed the release from prison. When he comes out from work, the next thing I do is he had a business, and many people would know that one of the things that he did, he had this thing, Starline business, telephone card business. Well, Logic would not give anybody a card business unless they bought $25,000 worth of cards first. And who purchased those cards for him so that he could have that business? Myself. Now, why am I saying that? I'm not saying that to break Ralph. I'm saying that because the choices of the Progressive Labour Party is this. If I had to go to the branch and get the support of the branch, I think I would have beaten Ralph Commission. Right? And that is indicative of the entire scope of Bermuda. You go from Southampton to St. George's. Southampton, for example, You might have 20 or 30 or 40 people up there who form a committee. And every year you can find, whenever there's an election, I should say, you would find 800 people voting for the PLP candidate. In Pembroke East Central, where I was District 21, every time there's an election, 800 people are going to turn up, almost assuredly going to turn up. But why is it that only 30 people or 20 people, sometimes even less people, get to choose who's going to run for them? There's a verse in the Quran which says, I've lived amongst you. I've lived a lifetime amongst you. And in American politics, they use this term, name recognition. And the reason why many people who like stars, movie stars, and whatever, football stars and all, have a better chance of winning because they are recognized by the people. So they have so the people know them, they understand them, they see who they are, and therefore have a chance to vote for them. Now, when you live in a community, it is those people in that community you live with who can best testify to who and what your character is and who you are. So any particular democracy, or any format for any proper format for democracy, should allow the people to choose who their candidate is going to be. But the Progressive Labour Party and the OVA, as it were, they have a special interest. The PLP's interest at the time, because it was a comrade, right? They could not afford to go to the broad majority to ask their endorsement for the candidate because they had an agenda. The OVA, the UBP, had the same philosophy. It couldn't afford to go to the broad community to find out who they can have as their representative because they had an agenda. They had to protect the interests, the self-interest of the oligarch, or whatever the establishment was. So it was not based on a democratic format where the people make decisions. So if there's any change that's going to happen politically in Bermuda, one of the first things is to hand back the politics to the people of the country, the people of Bermuda. Hand them back the right to choose who they need to choose. Because, you see, leadership is really there by the consent. Every man is free, entitled to be free, should be free. The idea of sovereignty is that each individual within himself is his own sovereign. When you and I or anyone give up our freedom and sovereignty for a leader, right, or for anybody, we're giving up our freedom for that. So there's a level of accountability that flows back towards that position.
And Mr. Wasi?
Position of accountability.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't want to dominate everything, but that's the thrust of what I try to where we're coming from.
Well, thank you for that. We have our final break, and then we'll come right back to you, okay? And we're back to Motion to Adjourn. That all goes quick. Mr. Wasi?
Yes.
Listen, we're going to have you back for some follow-ups, but before we go...
I'm sorry.
Huh?
I'm sorry for having to talk so much.
No. I mean, that's why we brought you. We wanted to have that insight, and I think it was very valuable. Before we go, I was just wondering if you would really quickly, because almost all the time, give us a bit of your predictions on the budget tomorrow.
Well, I can't predict. I think that I really can't predict, and I shouldn't predict. I think we're in a very precarious spot. Our economy is tanking, right? And what we're trying to do is try to figure out how to stave off full-blown bankruptcy, if I can use that term. So, and the question is going to be whether or not by increasing tax on the upper end, whether or not that's going to actually kill the baby, right? And I can't say. I don't want to predict what's going to happen there.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for taking some time out. And hopefully we can schedule you on for a follow-up probably sometime next month if you're willing.
Yes, I'm very willing. I was just inviting me, as you know, and I was looking forward to engaging him as well. So, all right. Well, thank you. Anyway, and thank the audience for listening.
Yes, definitely. And he'll be there. We'll make sure he's there next time. That's why I kind of wanted to give you the space to, share from your insight. Because I know if he was if he's here, it's probably be a little bit of a debate. So,
So therefore, I've given him enough to debate on. Okay, so if he pulls me on again.
Yes.
Right on. Thank you.
Thank you. Be safe. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all for listening. And, we hope that the show continues to provide you with insight that you may not have had. And we hope that you continue to tune in. With that, we are adjourned until next Thursday. See you then.
And you have been listening to Motion to Adjourn with MP Chris Famous and Dwayne Robinson, JP.